Hello everybody, I'm Shmuela from Israel and I'm really happy to be here at the jam.dev. My talk today is about from app to cloud, Azure Static Web Apps, how to take your web application and deploy it using the new service by Azure. So first, just a little bit about myself. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. This is why I'm talking about Azure, obviously. I also really love Angular and I'm the founder of NG Girls. You can see a picture here of one of the workshops that we've had in the past. I'm a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. But first and foremost, I'm an NG mom. This is Nadav, my NG toddler. He's almost 3 years old now. And the latest addition to the family, Asaf, my NG baby, he was born last July. They're also part of the reason why I'm pre-recording this talk, because you can never know what's going to happen when you have kids at home. But I will join you live for the Q&A session right after this talk. So, Azure Static Web Apps. What is it and what is so static about them? So this conference is all about Jamstack, which, as you probably know, is an architecture designed to make the web faster, more secure, and easier to scale. The entire frontend is pre-built into highly optimized static assets and pages during a build process. With Azure Static Web Apps, we're encouraged to implement this approach. The application files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and other files are static assets that are delivered to the client from the nearest cloud. Of course, the app itself is not static. With serverless functions and other services, the app is dynamic and engaging. So in this talk, I'm going to cover what do Azure Static Web Apps provide us. Setting up your static web app, how to set up your custom domain, authentication, serverless API with connecting to database, in my case it's Cosmos DB, and setting up your environment variables, and how to set up routes, why do we need them, and to configure authorization as part of these routes. So first of all, I've created a demo application and you can already see it at love-me.shmuel.me. Don't blame me, please. I'm not a designer nor a copywriter, so sorry about this awful domain name. But I call the app the Love Me app because you can click on the heart and show how much you love the app or its content or static web apps. And your likes are counted. If you're logged in, then your personal likes are also counted and you can see how many likes you gave to this application. You can give many likes. And the application also gives you lots of links to relevant resources, all about static web apps, Azure Functions, Cosmos DB, also the link to the Github repo where you can find the source code of this application. I'm also planning to add a gallery of static web apps, so when you create your awesome applications and use static web apps to deploy them, please ping me on Twitter and I'll add your application to the gallery. So the stack that I'm using on this application is Angular, of course, because like I said, I love it. Azure Functions for the serverless API. It also connects to static web apps really easily. Static web apps, obviously, Cosmos DB, like I said, and GitHub, that's where my code resides in the repository. And GitHub is connected to static web apps with workflows and actions, like we will see really shortly. There are, of course, more examples for static web apps. My demo application is really simple, but it's made this way to help you see the basic usage and take it from there with your imagination and your creativity. One of the links in my application is for a gallery of other static web apps, so you can see some of these examples there. What do we get with Azure Static Web Apps? Once we have our code on GitHub, we get a workflow file that triggers an action with every push to the main branch. This is how our continuous integration and deployment works. We can write serverless functions, this is our API, and have them as part of the repository. Then Azure deploys this API for us and provides us secure routes for triggering the functions. There are many options that we can configure for routing within our application and the API. We get an SSL certificate and the option to connect a custom domain. We get an authentication service with 5 major providers right out of the box. We can define different security roles for authorization. And our app is deployed at global scale. These things that are common and needed almost for any web application. With a simple setup, we get all of this right out of the box. Let's go ahead and set up the static web app. My code is already on GitHub, and here I am in the Azure portal, and I'm clicking on Create a Resource and looking for static web apps. You can see that it's still in preview. I'll select it and hit Create, and now I'll start filling out the details. First, I'll select a resource group, and I can create a new one here. I select a name for my static web app resource. This is the name of the application. And here I select a region. Now, this is not the location from which the app will be served to the users, because eventually it's going to be globally distributed right out of the box. But this is the location where the static web app resource on Azure will reside. So I want it to be as closest to me as possible. So I'm selecting here Western Europe. Next, I'm going to sign in with GitHub so that Azure will be able to see my repositories, and I'll be able to select one, and Azure will add the workflow file in this repository. So I get I'm signing in to GitHub. I'm not going to show you my credentials, of course. I've signed in and I get here the list of my organizations and the list of all my repositories. I select the right one, and I also select the branch from which the application will be built and deployed to production. So in my case, it's the main branch. Now I need to fill out some more details about where the artifact of the build will be, and the API. And Azure knows a few things about some frameworks. So for example, in Angular, it knows that the location of the client-side application is in the root folder. That's if you're using the Angular CLI with the default configuration. And it assumes that you'll put the API functions app under the API folder. And of course, you can change it here to something else, however you configured it. And the app artifact, when you build the application, is in this folder, but you have to add here, if you're using Angular, you have to add the name of your application, because that's the default with Angular CLI, this/the name of your application. So if you have some other configuration, if you're using another framework or another CLI tool for Angular, for example, NX, then of course you can change the configuration here. And now this configuration that you entered will create the workflow file. And if your configuration changes or you want to add anything else to the workflow, then you can go directly to the file that will be in your GitHub repo and change whatever you need right directly there. So we see the workflow file, we review what we want to create, and we'll hit create. And after really just a few moments, we will get the resource of the static web app here available for us in the Azure portal. Let's wait just a few more seconds, and we see here deployment succeeded. And we're going to the resource. The first thing that we need to know about this resource is that we get a URL where our application will be deployed to. It's an arbitrary URL. You can see here Black Meadow something something azurewebapps.net. And if we click here, let's see if we have the application over there. Oh no, we've got your Azure Static Web App is live and waiting for your content. So the resource is available and the application is supposed to be here, but the action on GitHub just started running. It built the application right now and it will deploy it. So it will take several minutes before we see the application here in this location. In the meantime, let's take a look at the GitHub repository. First, you can see that there's a new folder here that's created, .github/workflows. In this folder, you can find the workflow file that runs the action. Let's take a look at the action that runs. We have the Actions tab here, and we can drill into the current action, and we can also see the previous actions that were running. Let's drill into the action, and we can see all the steps, the different steps of the action. We can see all the outputs. We can see whether there are errors or warnings or anything else that the action gives us. Now, the action takes the build command from package.json, from the script that's called build. Again, you can change the configuration in the workflow file, but let's take a look at package.json for a moment. And here is the build command. Under scripts, you can see build. Now there's something important that you need to know, especially if you're using Angular CLI. The default command here is ng build without the prod flag, meaning that the application will be built in development mode, and you don't want this in this case. So the easiest thing to do is just to add the prod flag over here, like I did, ng build -- prod, and this will ensure that every time that this application is built with the workflow, it will be built for production with the environment variables of production and all the minification and everything that you need over there. So the action is complete, meaning that it's supposed to be deployed in the location where Azure gave us the static web app. So let's take a look. We'll go back to static web apps and click on the URL. Here it is. We have the application ready and deployed. Next, let's set up our custom domain. First, I need to configure it in the domain provider. In my case, it's GoDaddy. I'm configuring a new CNAME. I give it the host. This is the subdomain that I want, love-me. The domain is shmuel.me. And I need to point it to the right direction. That's the URL that I got from Azure Static Web Apps, Black Meadow something something. I always forget that it's without the HTTPS. Okay, so I set it up. And next I need to go to Static Web Apps on Azure and go to custom domains. It actually gives me here the instructions of what to do with the domain provider when I'm clicking on add. Now I need to connect it from this side. So I'm typing in the custom domain that I chose, love-me.shmuel.me. I'm going to validate it, and if everything is okay, I can click add, and this will connect the application to this domain. This will take just a few minutes. So we're waiting, and here the custom domain is created, successfully created. So let's take a look. I'm opening a new tab, entering the domain, and voila, here it is. As simple as that. Let's move on. Let's add authentication to our application. So we have a sign-in page. If you click on sign in, you'll see 5 different providers: Microsoft, GitHub, Google, Facebook, and Twitter. So these buttons are actually links that we get with static web apps. I didn't have to set up anything. I can just go and change the URL to .auth/login/ the name of the provider. I'll try out GitHub. And I get the page to log in with GitHub to grant a consent to the application. And that's it. No, really, I didn't have to connect to GitHub with code or anything. Azure does that for me. Now, I have another link out of the box, .auth/me, that gives me the client principal. These are the details of the user that is authenticated. That is the way that I can get these details in the client side. So let's see what links we get for free with static web apps. 5 different providers for logging in. The logout method, that's also a link. .auth/logout. .auth/me, like we saw, the user details. And there's also links out of the box for the API. I also included it here. /API with the route. We'll see that next. So right before that, so let's set up our API. The Azure Functions app is under the API folder in the repository. And each function has its own folder. We'll take a look at the get hello folder. There are 2 files there, functions.json and index.ts. Function.json is where we configure the function. We can see that this function is triggered by HTTP requests and it supports the get and post methods. Its route is hello, and that's important to know because we need the URL to trigger it. Let's go to see the implementation in index.ts. And yes, we can write our application, our functions with TypeScript, which is really awesome. This is a very, very simple function that all it does is returns a body of hello world. So I use it to test and of course to demo the serverless API. Let's see how it works. So like I said before, we get a route for all our APIs. So we just go to /API/hello. This is the route of the function. And here you see we get the response. Now we need to authenticate our users from within the API. We saw the method for getting the user details from the client side with the route .auth/me. But we don't want to take this object and send it to our API request. That's not secure because anyone can just send a different object that they will edit and build by themselves. We want to be sure that the user details that we get for the API is actually the user that is signed in. And thankfully, because Azure manages all of this, our API and the authentication, it can add the user details right away for our API. So it just adds it as an object in the header. And what you need to do is to extract it from the header, like I did here. This is a helper function that I have in the application. And what it does, it looks for the client principal header and then just takes the data, decodes it, and parses it. You can use this code or copy it from the static web apps docs, of course. Now, here is the location of this helper function, and I want to show you another helper function that I'm using for connecting to Cosmos DB. So this is actually a helper class, and I'm using the Cosmos DB JavaScript SDK to create a client that connects to my database using the endpoint and the key. And then I get access to the database and to the container that I need. Let's see how I use this client in the code. I'm going to one of the functions right now. I'm using it in several functions. And once I have access to the collection, I can read from it, I can create items, I can query the collection and delete items, update them, so on and so forth. So going back to the helper class, and you can see that I have several environment variables here. That's because I don't want my secrets to be in here in the code, but there are also other reasons. I may have different environments for development, staging, production, and also whenever I want to rotate some keys, I don't want to touch the code. I want to be able to do this separately. So let's see how I set up these environment variables. Let's take the Cosmos endpoint, this first one. I'm going back to the portal, to the static web app, and going to configuration. And here I choose my environment. You see that now I have only the production environment. And I'm clicking on add. I give the name of the variable and let's get the value. I'm going to my Cosmos DB in the Azure portal. And what I need here is the URI. I just copy it and that's the value that I need for this environment variable. I click OK. And now it's really important also to hit save because otherwise it's not saved. And here we go. We have the environment variable just set up like that. So I'm going to do this now with all these environment variables. But since there are some secrets, I'm not going to show you how I configure all of them. So here they are ready, just to hit save, and that's it. And then my application is connected to the database with all the URIs and the secrets and everything that we need here. So let's take a look. This is the database at the moment with only one item. I'm going back to my application and I'm starting to work with it. I reload it and I hit the heart and you see that I'm authenticated. So what is happening now is a new user created in the database. Here I'm refreshing it. So the first item is the general number of likes and the second item is a new item for my user. You can see my user details here and the numbers of likes that I hit. Lastly, we will define some routes and some authorization rules. In the application, when you click on your username, you're routed to user details, which displays the component with your user details, the client principal like we saw before. Now if I hit refresh, I get a 404 not found. Why does this happen? It happens because I have a route configured in the client side that serves the right component when you go to the user details route. But when you try to access this route directly from the server doesn't find a static asset to serve. So there are two options, either to provide it a static asset, to build this component as a static asset to be served, or to tell the server to serve index.html instead, and then the client-side router will take care of loading the right component. So how do I configure these routing rules in the application? All I need to do is to add a routes.json file somewhere in the code where it will be available later in the build artifact. So in an Angular project, everything you put under source/assets will be copied to the dist folder when you build the application. So that's where I want to put the routes file. So you can see here that I have 3 routes configured. The third one is for the user details route. You can see that I configured it to serve index.html. I also configured here an authorization rule so that only authenticated users will be able to access this route. The second route that I configured here is for the login page, and it also serves an index.html for the same reason. It's a component that is loaded from the Angular router on the client side, and I don't have a static asset for that. I didn't configure an authorization rule here because I want anyone to be able to access the login page. Maybe a good thing would be to configure a rule that only unauthenticated users will be able to see it, and other users will be redirected to a different page. Now, the first routing rule that I have here is for an API route, for the function that gives us the user details back to the client side. I added an authorization rule here so that only authenticated users will be able to use this API. So if the user is not authenticated, the function will not even start. So now that I have this routes JSON file and all the routes configured, let's see how it works in the application. So let's go to the route user details, and I just type in the address bar user-details. So I see that the component is loaded, and if I refresh the page, here I see the component loaded again. Now let's try to sign out and see if the authorization rule actually kicks in. So I'm trying again user details, and I see the component here loaded, but if I refresh the page, so you see that I get the unauthorized page. Why did this happen? Why do I first get the component loaded when I'm actually unauthorized? What happens is that when you are within the application and you give it a route in the address bar, the browser first goes to the application itself in the client side and tells it to load this route. So the Angular router kicked in and loaded the component. Only the second time when I refreshed, then it actually went to the server to ask for this location for this route. So what we need to do to avoid this is to also add guards to the router that we have in the client side. Now let's see if we actually have also the authorization rule in the API. So we're still logged out, and I'm typing in API/user, and we get the unauthorized page. Now I'll sign back in and try it again, /API/user, and here we see the response from the API. All right, so we configured the routes in the application, and there are a lot more options that you can add to the routing configuration, to the router JSON file. Just go to the static web app docs. You have a link in my app, and read all about the different options about redirecting, status codes, and a lot more options that you will need to configure for your application. To sum up my jamming stack, I'm using Angular, Azure Functions, and to be able to develop with Azure Functions locally on my computer, I've installed Azure Functions core tools globally, just with NPM. I'm using Cosmos DB, and like we saw, I'm using the JavaScript SDK for Cosmos DB from within my Functions app. Obviously, I'm using Azure Static Web Apps, and my code is on GitHub, which connects to Static Web Apps and builds and deploys the application with GitHub Actions. Now, something that I really have to mention here, when you develop your application and you have a new branch for a new feature, and you create a pull request to the main branch, Static Web Apps will create a new environment for your application, and you will actually get a link in the pull request page. A link that will show you the application deployed from this branch. So you can set up a new staging environment. You can configure different environment variables for this staging application, and you can test it as close as can be to production right before you merge the pull request. Now, which frameworks can you use with static web apps? You can use whatever framework you want. You can also just write your application with vanilla JavaScript. And you can even use other web technologies like .NET. It really doesn't matter. Whatever it gives you a web application in the end, you can use it to build and deploy with static web apps. Of course, the configuration may be a bit different than what I showed here, but like you saw, you just need to know where the build artifact is, where your API is, and that's it, more or less. Let's take just a final look at the application. And I really want you to go there and use it and click on the heart. I really want to see the numbers go up. And if you'd like, please authenticate. I want to see lots of users in my application. I'll keep updating the links here, especially as we're getting closer to GA, so that you will have all the information that you need to develop your own awesome app with static web apps and other Azure technologies. And please, like I said before, ping me on Twitter with your amazing application that you're using with static web apps so that I can add to the gallery that I'm going to build in this application. Here are my contact details. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and see you right now with Q&A.
Thank you, Shmuela. That was a great presentation. Now, obviously, that was pre-recorded, and I totally understand your reasons there. I don't have little kids anymore. They're grown, but they still wander in. But I do have 2 little dogs, including one little puppy is only like 8 weeks old. And so my biggest fear today is that they will just go absolutely crazy during one of these live portions. They were going absolutely crazy earlier, so thankfully not right now. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks. So we do have a handful of questions from the audience. So I'm going to get to those first. Any info on when Azure Static Web Apps will be released out of preview?
I'm not sure if I can say exactly the date. Things change, but really, really soon. I'm talking within the next few weeks.
Okay. Awesome. So coming soon. Okay. You heard it here first, folks. All right. So the next question was, are Azure Static Web Apps locked to Azure, or could they easily be moved to or from other providers? I'm assuming they mean like if you're already hosted on like a Versal or Netlify or AWS, is it easy to port them over here?
Yeah, I think it is easy. I haven't tried, but because the website, your web application actually starts from your code in GitHub. So that's the starting point. And from there, the workflow file just builds it and deploys it to Azure. So all you need to do is to configure this workflow file. And if you don't want it to happen anymore, or you want to change anything, you just go ahead and change the workflow file. You can delete it, and it just won't work anymore.
Right.
Apart from that, there's all the other things that you'll have to take care about. The authentication and what else?
Yeah.
I forgot. Routing, all the stuff that comes with Azure Static Web Apps that you'll obviously have to configure in. To configure in Azure or in another framework if you're using something else.
Right. Yeah, I think the way this is becoming, the platform you choose ends up being you end up tying in so many different pieces once you get beyond like just the build. Now, I think one of the interesting things when I've checked out Azure Static Web Apps is that you do all use GitHub Actions for the whole build process, right? Like so that part is just isn't even necessarily dependent on Azure, right? It just happens within GitHub.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, cool.
I want to mention also something. If we were speaking about the GA before, there's going to be more features, and maybe things will change until then, of course, but things will be more robust and solid once it goes to GA. And of course, this with a lot more features and flexibility.
Right. Excellent. Awesome. So I'm sure you get this question often. How is Azure versus Netlify for deployment? Like, how do you compare the two? What would be the benefit of Azure Static Web Apps, or et cetera?
So to tell you the truth, I have tried Netlify only just a little bit, so I'm not sure that I know about everything that's going on there, but I know that it's really simple to use. But on Azure, I don't really know how to compare it. I just know that on Azure, there are a lot of services that you can use that come out of the box from Azure, and then you can easily connect them to other services that you want to use, like I'm connecting to Cosmos DB. Because it connects you automatically to the API, then it's also something really, really easy and useful. I'm not sure how you connect to the API on Netlify, actually. Maybe it's also simple. But Azure is like a huge thing. It's a huge cloud, and there are so many services there. And I know that one of the core, core priorities on Azure is security. So that's also one of the big benefits there. It's just Azure. It's Microsoft. They're behind that. Yeah. Sorry, I can't really tell, but maybe I would actually love to hear if someone here has some experience with both of them or with Netlify and can compare to what I showed in the stock. I would love to hear about it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'd love to hear if anybody has tried both. Actually, write in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts. I think it seems to me I've only toyed with Azure Static Web Apps, but I think if you're already using a lot of Azure services, it sounds like it makes it really easy just to bring that into your application and connect to all those pieces. So cool. Is there a mechanism where immutable versions of the deployments are stored and you can roll back an arbitrary number of build versions? So I guess, is there a mechanism where immutable versions of deployments are stored that you can roll back?
I guess it's like the question is if you want to roll back to a previous version.
Yeah.
Well,
would that just be in
GitHub?
GitHub? Yeah.
Yeah, it's on GitHub. So you just roll back to one of your commits. At the moment, you saw that setting up environment variables and stuff like that, it's just the way that I showed it. So maybe on GA, there will be also some more, also saving previous versions.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know really. I don't know if it's gonna happen, but yeah, basically it's just on GitHub.
Cool. So the next question is, what is the pricing like for Azure Static Web Apps?
At the moment, it's free because it's on preview.
Yeah.
I don't know what the price will be in GA, but there will be a free tier, that's for sure. And you will be able to have a pretty nice web application with traffic that you can use for free.
Excellent. Okay. And if you were putting this whole demo site together into production from scratch, how quickly do you think you could get all this done? I assume this means this is more about getting everything set up in Azure and connected than about all the code necessarily. But
yeah, so if I take all the everything that I showed and just remove me talking would be just about 15, 20 minutes, just waiting for things to connect for the build, for the custom domain. Basically, it's just waiting for these services. Besides that, it's build takes, it also depends on your build system. So for Angular, it's about 4 or 5 minutes now, maybe less. And the custom domain is also a matter of minutes. Yeah, besides that, it all takes just seconds. And
Right.
the setup is really, really easy, like you saw. It's really simple. There isn't a lot to select, to toy around.
And so I had a couple of questions myself. So it seems like Azure Static Web Apps kind of has an emphasis on kind of the SPA kind of SP, single page application deployment versus like, I mean, you can also just deploy any static site generator that you have, like it'll run the build and like for 11e or Hugo or whatever.
Yeah, it works with tons of frameworks, especially for static sites. Hugo, Gatsby, I don't remember all the names.
Yeah, there's only like
Everything.
400
So
something of them.
yeah, and every minute there's another one. Yeah, just anything. But if it's static, it's better because Jamstack because it has your static assets and just serves them. It's always faster and better for us and for the users.
Okay, and can you I mean, if you were building say something like say a Next.js application that mixed server-side rendering with static rendering, you could still deploy it here, or you'd have to deploy it in a different kind of container?
So it depends what you mean by server-side rendering. If you can run it, because the build process takes the command from package.json, the build command. So if you can just install everything with npm and build it, then it will work because that's what happens behind the scenes. If you actually use another server and it's not configured there, then it's going to be a bit of a problem. But hey, I don't know. Maybe you have some setup that will work. And yeah, tell me about it. Maybe some container. I don't know. I'm not really sure how it works with containers.
Okay, cool. I was just curious, yeah, because I mean, it seemed like with the being able to do like just a typical Angular application, it should be able to, right? I mean, some of that's. It doesn't necessarily mean if you're building Angular or React or whatever, it's not necessarily purely everything static. Some of the routes will be dynamic, but I don't know. I haven't tried it myself. So, okay, awesome. Well, that's all the questions we have for you. I thank you so much for doing this and for joining us live here. I know it's late where you are, so we really appreciate it.